There are crimes that shock because of their brutality, and there are crimes that shock because of the person behind them. John Emil List was both. In November 1971, List was a 46-year-old accountant living with his wife, Helen, their 3 children, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick, and his elderly mother, Alma, in an imposing home in Westfield, New Jersey. From the outside, List appeared respectable. He was religious, had taught Sunday school, and was regarded as a strict and disciplined family man, but privately his life was unraveling. List was experiencing serious financial problems. His professional situation had deteriorated, the family home was heavily mortgaged, and he had been using money from his mother's savings. At the same time, he was increasingly troubled by what he saw as his family's declining religious commitment. Instead of telling his family how desperate his circumstances had become, List concealed the truth. Then he began preparing for something far more sinister. On November 9, 1971, List carried out a plan that would destroy his entire family. The killings began with his wife, Helen. According to accounts presented at his later trial, List shot her while she was having breakfast. His elderly mother, Alma, was upstairs. When she heard the sound, she reportedly asked what was happening. List went to her and shot her as well. His children were not all in the house at the same time. Patricia, 16, John Jr., 15, and Frederick, 13, were returning from their normal activities. List waited for them. One by one, they came home. And one by one, List shot them. John Jr. was shot multiple times, and investigators later theorized that he may have been attempting to escape. The precise sequence of every shooting became part of the evidence presented at trial, but the essential fact was unmistakable. List had deliberately killed his wife, his mother, and all 3 of his children. The killings were not an impulsive outburst. List had made preparations beforehand. He had written notes concerning his children's absences, dealt with household matters, and left a lengthy letter addressed to his pastor. He also took steps that helped conceal what had happened after he left. In that letter, List attempted to explain his actions through his religious beliefs and his fear of what he believed would happen to his family. His financial problems also formed a major part of the prosecution's explanation of his motives. But there was another part of the plan. List intended to disappear. After the murders, he left the house and traveled to New York. He abandoned his car at John F. Kennedy International Airport, creating the appearance that he might have traveled much farther away. He then began a new life under an assumed identity. Meanwhile, his family remained inside the Westfield house. The murders were not discovered until December 7, almost 4 weeks after they occurred. When police finally entered the home, they found the bodies of Helen, Patricia, John Jr., Frederick, and Alma. Investigators quickly identified List as the prime suspect. But he was gone. A federal warrant was issued for his arrest in December 1971, and investigators spent years searching for him. Leads came from across the United States and even from overseas, but none immediately produced his whereabouts. List, meanwhile, had essentially erased John List. He adopted the name Robert P. Clark and eventually settled in Colorado. He worked, attended church, and gradually rebuilt a life that appeared completely ordinary. In 1985, he married again. His new wife apparently had no knowledge of the terrible secret he had carried for years. Eventually, List moved to the Richmond, Virginia area and worked as an accountant. For almost 18 years, the man wanted for 5 murders lived under another identity. Then television changed everything. In May 1989, the case appeared on America's Most Wanted. The program presented the murders and included an age-progressed representation of what List might look like nearly 2 decades after the crime. The broadcast generated hundreds of tips. One of those tips pointed investigators toward a man living near Richmond under the name Robert Clark. FBI agents began investigating. On June 1, 1989, they arrested Clark at the accounting firm where he worked in Richmond. He initially denied that he was John List. But fingerprints told a different story. Authorities compared his fingerprints with records associated with List and established that the man living as Robert Clark was, in fact, John Emil List. After his arrest, List was returned to New Jersey to face the charges. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, the man who had vanished after killing his family was forced to confront the crime publicly. The trial began in 1990. There was little dispute that List had killed the 5 members of his family. His defense instead focused on his mental state. His attorneys argued that List had been suffering from a mental disorder and that his religious beliefs, financial desperation, and fear for his family's future had distorted his judgment. They portrayed his actions as the product of a deeply disturbed mind rather than the actions of a fully responsible murderer. The prosecution offered a very different interpretation. Prosecutors pointed to the planning that preceded the murders and the careful steps List took afterward. To them, his actions demonstrated that he knew exactly what he was doing. He had organized his affairs. He had prepared for the family's disappearance. He had fled. He had assumed another identity. And he had remained hidden for almost 18 years. The jury ultimately rejected the defense. On April 12, 1990, John Emil List was found guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for his wife, 1 for his mother, and 1 for each of his 3 children. On May 1, 1990, he was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms, with no possibility of parole under the sentence imposed. After almost 2 decades of unanswered questions, the families of the victims finally had a measure of certainty. But the case left behind a disturbing question that has followed John List ever since. How could an apparently ordinary father decide that killing his entire family was the solution to his problems, and then disappear into another life as though nothing had happened? John List died in prison in 2008. His new identity had lasted for nearly 18 years. His secret had lasted even longer. But eventually the fingerprints remained, and so did the truth.